All right. Well, here we are again. This is two in one day for me. So if you're watching on YouTube and you see I got on the same shirt, I actually wore this shirt today for this guest, which is Chris Matakas, and I've got on a Matakas Jiu-Jitsu shirt, and we'll get into that here in just a moment. But I am honored to have you here and to have this conversation. You and I have been in friendship and relationship for over a year now. And I reached out to you because I had started training jujitsu, and Amazon's robots decided that I needed to buy your book and kept putting it in front of me. And then so I ordered this book on jiu-jitsu right here, which I highly recommend. And I read through this book and I was like, man, this whole jiu-jitsu journey for me, which I recently kind of started blogging with that language at my blog, jiu-jitsu-with-jesus.com, but just my spiritual journey and how that has there's been so much that relates in my jiu-jitsu journey to my own personal spiritual journey. And what really I think helped connect the dots for me was your book on jiu-jitsu. And not that it's a overtly Christian resource or anything like that, but for me it very much helped me in my faith journey. And so then I decided to reach out to you, finding out that you were also a professional coach, and doing some business coaching and high performance psychology coaching and that sort of thing. And so, and I'll let you talk about that in a minute because I'm sure you can explain it way better than I do, and what you actually do. But yeah, so I've just been a recipient of our conversations, and you're probably going to say that it's been mutual,
Yes,
but
it has.
but it has really been a joy and an honor and a privilege to have a weekly conversation with you. And it has really challenged me on so many levels, both in my faith walk and being a father, being a husband, and being a good business leader to those that God has entrusted to my care. And so, um, without further ado, I introduce to you, our audience out there, Chris Matakas. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yes, sir. And yes, it is mutual, and I equally appreciate our time together. All right, so I am a jujitsu instructor. I've been doing that the longest. I have my own academy in Florence, New Jersey. I believe that jujitsu is the best tool for personal development, which is why I've kind of committed my life to sharing that with as many people as possible. That led to writing of the books, which has been an absolute joy. I appreciate the challenge of that, as you well know. And then that led to performance coaching, where I help pretty much community leaders or business leaders fulfill the vision they have for themselves. We're all stuck somewhere. And if we're not stuck somewhere, maybe we don't know where it is we want to go. So I help provide clarity and a roadmap and remove some limiting beliefs on the way. And often through jujitsu language, because it's just such a perfect vehicle for all the things we're going to talk about today and for all the transformations we want to create in our personal lives and our professional lives. And I'm just grateful to be a steward and what would it be, evangelist for jujitsu.
Nice, nice. Well, you and I have had quite a few conversations over. I mean, how long has it been? Has it been like?
I don't know. It's
Is it?
maybe year and a half,
Yeah,
two,
I'm
coming up on
thinking
two.
close to a year and a half
That's
at least.
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about how much water has been under the bridge. I'm looking at your book, and I'm trying to find. There was a quote in here that uh, Yeah. So I love this quote. It says, "Jujitsu no longer allows me to claim woeful ignorance. I can no longer blame fate for my circumstances or chance for my hardships. Each phenomenon is preceded and followed by a link in the chain. We just need to develop the lens to see the chain to which we are bound."
Yes.
Um, I think that quote really illustrates a lot of what I talk about here on the show, and what, this idea of a seasonal growth mindset. And when we think about our lives in terms of seasons, um, and so we can use jujitsu language here. We'll make sure. I don't think there are many people out there listening that do jujitsu, so we'll try to make sure we don't use too much lingo here.
Mhm.
But I know that when I first started jujitsu, it was I fell into my normal patterns of performance and achievement, and what I wanted to do in some ways was circumnavigate the process
Mhm.
and get to the place of arrival, or get to the place of knowledge, or whatever. And what I discovered along the way was that that's not going to be possible. And so, um, your journey has been filled with stories of that as well.
Mhm.
And so, you and I were talking a little bit before we hit record, and you have some ideas about what to share. But just as you think about your jujitsu journey and your life journey in general, and as we communicate to those out there listening, like if they feel like, you know every day has to be better than the day before,
Mhm.
and they get into this perpetual cycle of anxiety and stress and fear of missing out, and comparison culture,
Mhm.
uh, and they find themselves in a place of anxiety and stress, and all of that. How can we reframe that for them? How can we help them reframe those struggles, that resistance, as you so eloquently refer to it in here and in the hero's journey? So I'm going to turn it over to you. Share a story about your life and the resistance that you've been through, and
Mhm.
your struggle, and what we call winter seasons here on the Leader Farming Podcast.
Mhm.
So without saying anything else, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yes, sir. So my greatest winter came when I tore both my pecs and was in two slings for 4 months. So preceding that was the philosophy you just described, this deprivation model of a lack, where I'm not enough as I am, but if I do this thing, then I'm more worthy of being. And
Mhm.
I used football for that when I was in high school and then into college. And then ironically, I got hurt in college and couldn't play anymore. And then I used strength training, weightlifting, bodybuilding for that. I did that for a while. And then I graduated college, and I was always told my whole life that, like, when you graduate college, you go out into the real world. So
Mhm.
I remember standing outside the stadium with my diploma and being like, everybody lied. The world is no different. I feel no different. I do not feel prepared to confront the reality of the real world. So I was like, I need a rite of passage. I need a discipline that is going to force me to become what I know I can be, but that my environment has not yet demanded of me. So I
Mhm.
went looking for that. And something like a week after graduating college, I took my first intro lesson in jujitsu, and I learned a hip toss. I learned how to break fall. I learned a cross collar choke. And I recognized immediately, like, this is a problem worth solving. This is something difficult enough physically, emotionally, cognitively, that I need to see what's here. I need to pursue this. And, I just graduated college. I didn't have a job. And like $209 a month was like more than I had in my bank account. But I was like, here's my card. I'll figure it out. Let's dive in. And it's been a joy ever since. That was 2008. And I pretty much devoted a decade to doing nothing but jujitsu. Like, this was my agogi. This was my place of training where I would train 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 times a week. And when I wasn't training, I was watching film. And when I was training, I was fortunate enough, because of my teacher, Professor Almeida, we literally had the best guys in the world in the room every day. Like, if you're familiar with jujitsu these days, like the best guys, Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin, they were my main training partners for like 5-6 years, which is just a blessing that I did not deserve, but I've tried to be a good steward of. And then in the MMA world, like, we got to train with Frankie Edgar, Renzo Gracie, Eddie Alvarez, like X, Y, and Z, everybody. So I had this opportunity created by these amazing people around me to actually have an environment that the only way I could survive within that environment was to become a very different version of myself. So I found that rite of passage that I was looking for. And then, kind of fast forwarding to my great winter, around 2015-ish, I would say, I was a brown belt. I had decided I was done competing, and I don't think I competed for about a year, but I always had that itch, because I'm surrounded by world champions every day. And I'm like, I know I can do that. I'm not as good as them, but I know I can do that. So that itch never went away. And looking back on it, that itch was, you're not enough as you are, but if you win a world championship, then you'll be enough. And we know if I did it, I wouldn't have felt that way. But that was the model that I was working with. So I was like, okay, I'm going to compete again. I'm going to win a world championship. So I started aggressively strength training again. And my body, from training 16, 17 times a week with no rest, was just destroyed, right? Like, everything hurt. I didn't care as long as I was getting better at jujitsu. And I remember the day where I was going in, and it was a leg day, and my lower back was hurting so much I couldn't do legs. So I was like, okay, I'll do push-pull. I'll do upper body. And then I'm warming up, because it was bench and pull-ups, and the bar hurt my shoulder. And I was just like, I am not that broken that I can't work out at all today. You're going to work out, go anyway. Because I've done that my whole life, and it's always worked until it didn't, which was this day. So each warm-up set, I was getting more and more pain, but it was a weird pain. It was foreign to me. And then I was on my last warm-up set, I had 215 on the bar, and I lowered it. I'd done this 10 times last week, and it was easy. So I was like, okay, no big deal. Last warm-up set. I lower it, and I start to go up, and I just feel like a lightning strike, and you can hear it. And I feel my pec pull off my arm to the sternum. And I immediately knew, like, I had torn my pec. And as the weight fell down on the safety pins, while I was sitting up off the bench, like, I looked up at God and was just like, all right, I get the message. I know I'm not supposed to be doing this. I know I'm not meant to compete. I know I'm meant for other things. I get it. I understand. And I wasn't going to get that message until I tore my pec. So, all right, let's take it from there. So I tear my pec, and most people will get surgery. But because I had always used physical pursuits as the means by which I validated my self-worth, I couldn't not pursue things physically. So I couldn't get surgery in my head. So I started rehab a week later, and I rehabbed non-surgically. Everything was going well. Fast forward to 2017, I'm going to open up my own school. So in 2016, I went away on a solo road trip to all the national parks. It was an absolute joy in my beat up Sebring convertible with no brakes. And I came back, and I was like, I want to do what I was doing prior to the trip. I want to serve people, but in a bigger way. So I opened up my own academy. Literally the day before the academy opened, I was walking my dog. She lunged at another dog, and I tore the pec again. And dude, like, I was like, there's no way this just happened. I was in disbelief, because I was doing a lap around our block, and I still had to finish the lap. So your mind is going crazy, because all I want to do is go look in the mirror and see, like, is my pec more disformed? Am I actually messed up? So I get home, take my shirt off. My pec is clearly torn again. And I was just like, all right, well, my school opens tomorrow. We'll figure it out. And because I'm an idiot and I continued to fail to listen to the messages, I taught the next day and I kept training just using one arm, and no one really knew I was using one arm. And I did that for like the first 7 months of opening the academy. Again, just a complete separation between my identity and my body. I somehow created this divide where my body was a vehicle for my identity and I abused it. And then 7 months of that, we were expanding the school and I was carrying drywall and I felt the pec get a little messed up again. And then that night I was writing and I pushed to get up off the floor and my other pec tore, which apparently has been compensating, my whole life. And that brought me to the darkest winter of my life. And in that moment, I walked upstairs, I got in bed, I was like shaking because I was in shock. But I was so calm and accepting of it. Like I felt a presence in my room, just letting me know, like, dude, this has to happen. It's okay. This is what you need to go through right now. So I woke up the next morning. I went to my parents' house, driving with like my hands, at 5:30 and 6:30, because I can't really extend my arms. And I made it to my parents. And I remember I just saw my dad and mom and I just broke down, just crying. And my then girlfriend, now wife, just kind of put her life on hold and moved in with me to take care of me. And that began 4 months in slings. So we spent 3 months looking for a surgeon because I had just opened up the academy. I didn't have an income, we were paying off debts. So I was on Obamacare health insurance, which is great. You have insurance, but no one told me that no one takes that insurance. So I go to all the surgeons and there's only like a handful that will actually work with me. So in the 3 months after tearing the second pec, surgeon after surgeon, sorry, can't help you. Sorry, you're too far gone. I won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Sorry, can't help you. So I'm reading, like anything I can to keep my mind right. Like as I get bad news after bad news after bad news, I'm just like going for walks with The Obstacle is the Way in my ears by Ryan Holiday. And I would just listen to that book every day and just keep walking and keep walking. And the worst part was, as these 3 months continued, I still had to function a little bit. Like I would still kind of like shower and then in the shower, tear the pec a little bit more. And each time it was like mentally just debilitating. So kind of coming to the end of the story. So finally, a friend of a friend of a friend says, I know a surgeon in a nearby state. He's top notch. We're going to sneak you into the emergency room. You fell outside and he's going to fix you right there. So I was like, okay, I'm in, let's do it. So I went to that hospital. I showed up, I checked in. They brought me in right away. So I was like, it's actually going to happen. I'm finally going to get this surgery. Because having a growth mindset, I just want to start getting better. Like, let me rehab. I can't linger in this purgatory. So they bring me in at like, I was supposed to be there at 12. They bring me in at 12:02. Like, it was amazing. They get me ready for surgery. And the surgeon never came. From like noon until about 1 a.m, they kept saying, he's tied up. He's tied up. He'll get to you. Apparently there was a shooting in that city that day. So the ER was just full. So there was no room for me. So around like 1 a.m, my now wife is sitting there. My parents are there. They're just like, sorry, we can't help you. So it was the longest drive home. And I remember walking through the park the next day because I was just like, I just need to get outside, get me in nature. And I was walking down the park and I saw an old woman walking past me. And in that moment, like my heart broke open because I was in so much pain, more pain than I had ever experienced physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I knew that at some point in her life, she had probably felt that too. And I couldn't imagine another human being feeling the way I did. And I just broke down. And it was like any walls between me and other people just kind of like crumbled. And shortly after that, I finally met the surgeon who would help me out, Dr. Sean McMillan. He's the man. He put both pecs back together at the same time. Then I had a month in slings where I couldn't use my arm again, and then rehab. And then the final piece of the puzzle, because, it's never easy in the winter season. My one incision on my right arm would not close. My body had rejected the hardware they were using, and we didn't know that at the time. So they kept doing these revisions where they go in, they cut out the scar tissue, and they'd sew me back up. And then I had 6 or 7 of those over the next year that progressively got worse and worse, because when they would sew me up, there would be less viable skin to use each time. So it would be more scar tissue, less skin. And then a week after surgery, 2 weeks after surgery, my arm would just pop back open. So for the year after surgery, I was just leaking pus from my armpit while teaching, while living my life. In my wedding photos, you can see a stain in my right armpit from the pus leak.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had that for 6 or 7 surgeries. And then I finally got to the point where I met a surgeon who was like, all right, here's the deal. We need to take out every piece of hardware they put in, and I think it's going to work. So he took out most of it, and it didn't work. So he was like, all right, I'll try it one more time. I will take out everything that I can possibly find, but you're running out of skin. So if this doesn't work, we're going to need to do a skin graft and take part of your thigh skin and throw it into your armpit. Luckily, that was the surgery. After taking out all the hardware, it closed, it stayed closed, and I have been rebuilding ever since. So that was the winter. That was like probably a 1.5 to 2 year period in my life where ended up being one of the most fruitful experiences of my life, and at the time was the most difficult. So where should we go from here, sir?
Well, I have 2 ideas. One, if you're like me, you're sitting here envisioning someone in 2 slings and trying to figure out how, if you had to go to the bathroom, you were able to wipe yourself. And my assumption is you couldn't. And the humility that comes with someone else having to wipe your bottom for you. And or 2, you made this statement that it, and this may end up being the title of the podcast, but it works until it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we could explore that a little bit. We got about 10 minutes of I think we'll tee it up this way. And if there's anything else that comes to mind in the next 30 seconds, feel free to go that avenue as well. But as we think about those that are out there listening, and again, I don't know how many people are listening, and frankly, I don't care. It's I'm doing this as much for me and in my conversations. But I do know that these conversations are of immense value to those that are willing to listen. And I think that there are some folks out there that are in, that 20 to 30 range, that are young professionals that are just trying to figure out life, that are walking outside the stadium with their diploma in their hand, saying, now what,
Yeah.
And if you could go back and, speak to your 21-year-old self, or, you're speaking to these folks out there right now, like, what would you say about this journey that you've been through, and, this evolving from, it works until it doesn't, and what you learned from that, or the humility. But yeah, let's close us out with, a final thought of what you would just really want to communicate to that person that walks out with that diploma in hand, looks left, looks right, and says, now what?
Yeah. Yeah. So you started this conversation by talking about the benefits of jiu-jitsu. And I think the greatest benefit for me in the 15 plus years I've been training has been jiu-jitsu forces you to acknowledge immediate feedback, because if you don't, you get choked. So it trains this sort of like early warning system, this radar in you, where you become very aware of the feedback that your environment presents to you. It's very readily apparent in jujitsu. Sometimes it's harder when it's your wife or your business, but the feedback is always there. And I think to the degree that we can become sensitive to that, we can integrate the lesson and become more wise, right? We can turn that knowledge into wisdom. I obviously got several messages from my body throughout those years that what I was doing was not going to work long term. And I chose to neglect those messages. That led to a great winter, which inevitably led to spring, where I started to actually listen and pay attention to my environment. So, what I would tell the 22-year-old me that just graduated college is that life is a single player game, but we're all playing it on the same board. In high school, you can compare yourself to the people around you because you have the same zip code, you take the same classes, you take the same tests. But really, the moment you're out of school, there are no reference points. And I think the only worthwhile reference point is relative to your soul and what it is that you feel you were put on this earth to do. And if you, we'll call that meaning, to pursue meaning, to fulfill meaning. And if you don't have that, then your meaning is to find your meaning. Mm-hmm. So you're never out of the game. And the single player game idea, I believe that each of us, that Carl Jung idea of you're circumambulating towards something, your whole life is aiming at something you can't quite see what it is. But if you pay attention to the feedback, you may have an idea of what your depths are pulling you toward. I, in my younger years, got caught up playing other people's games. And I remember a very distinct moment where one of my teammates, Frankie Edgar, had just won a UFC title. And a few of my teammates were so excited to be training with Frankie Edgar. They were so pumped about that. And I remember looking at them and addressing them and saying, that's amazing, but I want to be the Frankie Edgar of my own life. Mm. And the only way you get to do that is to get quiet and to listen and figure out what your single player game is, and then fulfill that prescription with all of the effort and tenacity you possibly can. But there's an expression, if you play stupid games, you get stupid prizes. I can't think of a more stupid game than playing someone else's game. So my advice to my 22-year-old self would be just make sure you take the time and you get quiet to figure out what your game is, and then have the courage or find the courage to fulfill that prescription.
That's so good. And, there's so much depth to that. And, I hear what you're saying. And so just to help those out there listening, I literally earlier today, I had a conversation with a younger version of me. I won't say names, but this person reminds me so much of myself. And he was lamenting an employee that quit yesterday. And then the husband of the employee called and said a bunch of things. And I said to him, if you can get past hearing what he said to hear what he said,
yes,
there's something there.
Yes.
And so, with that said, this idea of, single player game and, a practical step that you mentioned is get quiet. Mm-hmm. What are some other things? I mean, again, they're walking out of the stadium, looking left, looking right. What's next? What do they need to do on a daily basis to move a step in that direction, to cultivate habits that will help them see the feedback that's coming to them? So any words of wisdom there?
I think the simplest approach would be follow your smiles and follow your fear. If you continually pay attention to what makes me smile most, then you prioritize and make sacrifices for that, be it a person, be it a passion, whatever it is, If you follow the smiles, that will ultimately lead you to your game. Conversely, follow your fear. As an example, I've officiated a bunch of weddings, and the first one was a teammate asked me to do it. And when he asked me, I got this gut feeling of fear in my stomach. And I was just like, oh, that means I have to do it, because that means there's something in that experience that I don't yet have that I need to cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
And through that environment, I'll become what I know I'm supposed to be. So for the last 14 years, I've pretty much just followed and prioritized the things that make me smile. And I have made myself do the things that I'm afraid of. Now, that's easier said than done, but I kind of live by this idea. If you increase voluntary struggle, you will decrease involuntary suffering. If you can make yourself do difficult things with your health, with your business, with your marriage, you will suffer a lot less. And I think there is no shortage of suffering in life, but at least for me and the people around me, to the extent that we voluntarily pursued doing difficult things, life becomes comparatively more palatable and more accessible.
Beautiful, beautiful. Do hard things.
That's it, man.
You
That's
know,
it.
I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I moved my family to the farm. I grew up here on the farm as an only child, and I wanted my parents. I didn't really understand the whole, and I won't get into that whole story, but my parents, they couldn't have any more kids. But I was like, I need some help around here. Like, we need some, most families that grow up on farm have a bunch of kids. Well, here I am, 7 kids on a farm. But one of the reasons I wanted to be back here was to cultivate intentional hardship for my children. Now, they have an easy life, but they get more hardship through jujitsu than they do from the farm at the moment. But again, I mean, just to your point, like, going out there on the mat, facing their fears, and intentionally moving toward the struggle has it changed so many things in my relationship with my children, and in their own personal journey. It's just, I don't know that they can put words to it yet, but they'll look back one day, maybe listen to this podcast, and see the fruit of what it did for them. And so, man, thank you for carving out this time to just have this conversation with me. The tables turned a little bit
I
today.
like it. I like it. Absolutely.
Yeah, usually you're asking me questions, and today I'm asking you questions. So it's been fun. It's been a joy. I'm honored and grateful for your friendship and our relationship. And I look forward to much more in the future. And again, thank you for sharing with this community. And I will definitely see you next week on our coaching call.
Yes, sir. My sincere pleasure, man. It's always an absolute joy.
Thank you.